The world doesn't end with a single death. It ends with the silence that follows. When All Might fell in Kamino Ward, the cameras didn't cut away. They stayed fixed on his broken body as All for One stood over him, breathing, victorious, and very much alive. The symbol of peace wasn't retired, he was erased. And in that moment, every hero, every villain, every civilian watching understood the same terrible truth. The pillar holding up their entire civilization had just shattered. But here's what no one talks about. What happens in the 48 hours after that broadcast ends, when society realizes their god can bleed? When the man who embodied invincibility becomes a corpse on national television? The collapse doesn't start with villains, it starts with fear. The first domino falls within minutes. Stock markets across Japan don't just drop, they implode. Hero insurance agencies, security firms, real estate, and hero-protected districts, all of it becomes worthless the second All Might's heart stops beating. Because the entire infrastructure of hero society was never built on laws or institutions. It was built on the assumption that All Might would always win. That assumption is now a body bag. But the economic collapse is just the surface wound. The real damage occurs in the psychological architecture of every person who witnessed that broadcast. For 20 years, All Might wasn't just a hero, he was the answer to an unspoken question that plagued every civilian. What if the monsters win? His existence was the definitive no. He was the boundary between nightmare and reality, the proof that good could physically overpower evil. All for One didn't just kill a man, he killed an idea. And the void left behind is immediately exploited. Within 12 hours, every high-security villain prison experiences simultaneous riots, not because they're coordinated, though some are, but because the guards themselves are paralyzed by the same existential dread as everyone else. Tartarus holds, barely, but 3 secondary facilities don't. The villains who escape aren't the masterminds, they're the chaotic, the violent, the ones who don't need plans, they just need the world to stop watching. The Hero Public Safety Commission convenes an emergency session. Endeavor is the obvious choice to become number 1, but here's the problem. Endeavor existing as number 2 only worked because All Might existed as number 1. The gap between them wasn't incremental, it was ontological. All Might could change weather patterns with a punch. Endeavor just burns hot. Promoting Endeavor doesn't restore faith. It highlights the catastrophic downgrade. So, the Commission does what every failing institution does when confronted with existential collapse. They lie. Propaganda floods every channel. The hero system remains strong. Endeavor will protect you. Trust the process. But propaganda only works when people want to believe, and right now, everyone just watched their reason to believe die on live television. The cracks are forming, but the real question isn't whether society will fracture, it's whether anyone will be left to pick up the pieces. Shigaraki Tomura doesn't celebrate. Most would expect the League of Villains to capitalize immediately, to strike while heroes are reeling. But Shigaraki understands something crucial that even his mentor couldn't fully articulate. All Might's death isn't valuable because it creates opportunity. It's valuable because it creates inevitability. He doesn't need to attack, he just needs to wait. Because here's the reality of power vacuums. They don't reward those who rush to fill them. They reward those who understand that vacuums naturally fill themselves with chaos, and chaos is the most efficient destroyer of existing order. Every villain that attacks now, every hero that fails to stop them, every civilian that loses faith, they're all doing Shigaraki's work for him. So, the League goes quiet. Disturbingly quiet. This silence becomes its own form of psychological warfare. Every day that passes without the League attacking feels like waiting for a guillotine blade that never falls. The hero community fixates on this absence, turning it into paranoia. Why aren't they moving? What are they planning? The question becomes more destabilizing than any actual attack could be. Meanwhile, the infrastructure of hero society begins its real collapse. Hero agencies dependent on All Might's deterrent effect start folding, not because they're attacked, because their clients stop paying. Why invest in B-tier heroes when they couldn't stop villains even with All Might alive? Private security firms with actual combat capability begin replacing traditional hero agencies. And here's the critical distinction. Private security doesn't answer to the Hero Commission. They answer to whoever pays. The quirk system itself starts fragmenting. For decades, the hero-villain binary was maintained by a simple principle: overwhelming force concentrated in a legitimate monopoly, the hero system backed by All Might's existence. But that monopoly just died. Now, powerful quirk users have a choice: continue operating within a system that demonstrably failed, or start negotiating their own terms. Some heroes, particularly those who always resented the Commission's restrictions, begin operating independently. They're not villains, they're not even mercenaries. They're pragmatists who recognize that institutional legitimacy means nothing if the institution can't protect anyone. This is how civil order dissolves. Not with revolution, but with defection. The Commission tries to respond with force: emergency quirk regulations, mandatory hero conscription for A-tier licenses, curfews in major cities, but every authoritarian measure they implement proves the same thing. They're governing through fear now, not legitimacy. And fear-based governance has a fatal weakness. It only works if you fear them more than you fear everything else. Right now, people fear everything. Deku watches this unfold from UA, and every instinct screams at him to act, to prove that All Might's legacy didn't die with him. But Deku is 15 years old with a quirk he could barely control, and the weight of All for One feels less like inherited power and more like inherited guilt. Because All Might didn't just pass on a quirk, he passed on an impossible standard that no human being could maintain. And everyone is about to learn what happens when impossible standards meet human limitations. The Hero Public Safety Commission makes a decision that will redefine everything. They approach Endeavor with a proposal that violates every principle Hero Society was supposedly built on. They want him to kill. Not in defense, not accidentally, strategically. The logic is brutally simple. All for One won because he was willing to kill, and All Might wasn't. The next symbol needs to operate without that restraint. They frame it as pragmatism. We can't afford mercy when extinction is the alternative. They even have a list prepared. High-level villains whose existence poses systemic risk. Targets, assets to be neutralized. Endeavor refuses. Not because of morality. Endeavor's relationship with heroic ethics has always been complicated. He refuses because he understands what the Commission doesn't. Becoming the symbol of peace by killing doesn't create peace. It creates a different kind of tyranny. And tyranny, no matter how well-intentioned, eventually devours everything. But here's what makes this moment devastating. His refusal doesn't matter, because the Commission doesn't actually need his permission. They just needed to know he wouldn't cooperate. Within weeks, they begin recruiting heroes who will, A-tier combatants with lethal quirks and flexible morals. They don't call them assassins, they call them crisis response specialists. The terminology is different, the function is identical. This is the threshold. The moment Hero Society doesn't collapse, it transforms into something unrecognizable. And the public never finds out. That's the horrifying part. The propaganda continues. Endeavor is protecting you. Trust the system. Order is being maintained. And technically, it is. Crime rates in certain districts actually drop. Not because people feel safer, but because the Commission's shadow operatives are efficient. But Deku knows. He doesn't know specifics, but he knows enough. He sees it in the way certain villain attacks just end. No arrests, no trials, just silence. He sees it in the way Hawks starts looking at him during training with something between pity and warning. He sees it in the faces of classmates who still believe in the hero system exactly as All Might presented it, completely unaware that the system they worship is already dead. And he realizes something All Might never had to face. Inheriting One for All doesn't just mean inheriting power, it means inheriting the responsibility to decide what kind of hero he becomes in a world where the old definitions no longer apply. Does he expose what the Commission is doing and watch whatever remains of social order collapse completely? Or does he stay silent, preserve the illusion, and become complicit in the same institutional decay he's supposed to prevent? There are no good options. There never were. But here's what everyone missed while fixating on societal collapse. All for One never wanted to rule. That's the fundamental misunderstanding at the core of every analysis of his character. Ruling requires maintenance, it requires infrastructure, legitimacy, the boring bureaucracy of power. All for One has lived for over a century. He's already experienced every variation of control. What he wants now is something more profound. He wants to prove that heroes were always a lie. His victory over All Might wasn't about killing a rival, it was about killing a myth. And myths don't die with bodies, they die when people stop believing them. Everything happening right now, the Commission's moral compromises, the fragmenting hero system, the rise of pragmatic violence, it's all proof that heroism was never sustainable, that it was always a temporary fiction maintained by one man's overwhelming power. So All for One doesn't attack. He doesn't need to. He just releases information. Carefully, anonymously. A leaked commission document here, a witness testimony there. Nothing definitive, nothing traceable, just enough truth to make people question everything. The public discovers that the Commission authorized lethal force, that crisis response specialists are executing villains without trial, that the hero system they believed in was always more fragile than they realized. And the revelation doesn't come from villains, it comes from their own institution's desperation. This is psychological warfare perfected. All for One understands that the opposite of order isn't chaos, it's disillusionment, and disillusionment is permanent. You can rebuild after destruction. You can't rebuild after people stop believing the reconstruction matters. Shigaraki finally understands what his master was building toward. Not a villain empire, a world where the distinction between hero and villain becomes functionally meaningless, where everyone operates through the same logic of survival, power, and self-interest that villains always used, but without the honesty of admitting it. Hero society doesn't fall to villain attacks, it falls to its own reflection. Deku stands in the wreckage of everything All Might built, holding a power meant for a world that no longer exists. One for All was designed to defeat All for One, but All for One already won. Not by destroying heroes, but by proving they were always temporary. That any system requiring a godlike figure to maintain order was a system designed to fail the moment that figure fell. The question isn't whether Deku can become the next symbol of peace, it's whether any symbol of peace was ever sustainable, or if All Might's entire era was just a beautiful anomaly, a brief moment where one man's impossible power created the illusion that hope could be permanent.
All for One didn't just kill All Might, he killed the possibility that heroism could exist as anything more than individual choice in an indifferent universe. And every morning, Deku wakes up carrying the weight of a legacy that might have been poison disguised as inspiration. Some inheritances save you, others bury you under the weight of what you can never become.
All Might believed that symbols create stability, that if people could believe in something strong enough, the world would hold together. But maybe symbols don't prevent collapse. Maybe they just delay it. Because once a society builds itself around a single, impossible figure, the moment that figure falls, everything underneath is exposed. Not villains, not monsters, but the quiet truth that order was never permanent to begin with. And Deku is left standing in the aftermath, carrying power meant for a world that no longer exists, asked to become a symbol in an era that no longer believes in them. So the real question isn't whether heroes can save this world, it's whether the world was ever built to survive heroes at all. See you in the next paradox.